Siemna Siea, Siemna Sol Juan, Siemna Huomoch Mestimuch, Siemna Huolanita Mestimuch, Heitzavka. I want to thank you for joining us in this virtual space and acknowledge that we are gathered today on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, known as the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you everybody for joining this talk today. This is a very difficult conversation, but it's still important to have. And so we would like to thank you for attending face-to-face with racism. We had set up a panel of 4 people speaking today, which includes me, Stephanie, Toulou, and Roland, to share their stories with you. Then we were followed by questions and answers. The goal of this time is to have a conversation. Offering this is nerve-wracking. Everyone's nervous here. We were talking about it earlier today. So we're very glad that you're here to listen to these stories. We will be sharing personal stories that are very close to our hearts. And we appreciate you being here and holding space. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the hour using Slido. Press the like button for questions in the Slido feed you would like us to discuss. So if you like a question, you could like it and vote on it, and then after the webinar, we will try to answer those questions as much as we could. And if there are questions that we haven't answered, we will for sure address that in the blog that will come right after. I also wanted to say that, as you could see, we're following the COVID guidelines in terms of social distancing. So we are pretty far apart from one another. And I hope that's visible. You could see that through the camera today. It takes a team to create this kind of conversation, the webinars, and all of the presenters, our speaker coach. And so we would like to thank the people who help us to put this event, such as James, Mackenzie, Popkan Janakong Torn, and Inderdeep, who created the poster for today. So some housekeeping. We want you to know that, we want to know what you think about this talk, what was great and what we can improve on. A survey will be sent out at the end of this talk to learn more about what you think and how we can improve in the future. And so now I think we could start talking about our own experiences, and we will start with Stephanie, and then Toulou, and me, and then we'll finish with Roland. So Stephanie, please share your story.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Peter. I'm from Cowichan tribes, the territory in the Cowichan Valley. I carry the ancestral name Solaliatnot, and it's a name that that was bestowed upon me by my family, and it comes from my mother and from her maternal grandfather before her. Carrying a name in the Hulkminam or Coast Salish tradition also means carrying responsibilities, and as the carrier of this name, I take great pride in it and great pride in my ancestry. I'm a mom of 3. I work for the BC Public Service and the Public Service Agency on the Indigenous Initiatives lead in the Diversity and Inclusion branch. What that means is that daily I confront racism in the literature that I review in responding to questions about Indigenous initiatives and why there are specific projects or programs for a certain group of people. And once you see something, it's really hard to unsee it. And so I want to share that, well, I'm honored to be part of such an esteemed panel. To share our stories like this, it means that I have to open a wound. And it's a wound that I've carried with me as an Indigenous person, and I think a lot of other Indigenous people do as well. It's the wound of colonization. It's the wound of micro-assaults and micro-insults that build up over time, and micro-invalidations, and those incidents, the cumulative effect of them, leave a big scar on my heart. And so in sharing today, I ask that that you listen to it with the same courage and humility that I'm bringing to this moment that I'm sharing with you virtually. I ask for your patience as I try to unpack some of my story. And I want to be really clear that I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as someone who's walking in a world of, I see myself primarily as walking in an Indigenous world. And when I step outside of my home and outside of my family, I'm stepping into a world with multiple perspectives, and I acknowledge that mine isn't, that my worldview isn't the dominant one. And so in doing that, I know that I have to adapt. And so I want to thank you for your patience and tell you a little bit about where I come from and why I do this work. Growing up Indigenous, I didn't think very much about what it meant in the same way that I look at things today. I heard Hulkaminam, the language that's spoken in the Cowichan Valley. It was spoken by my grandparents. My parents didn't speak it, and I grew up learning it at my preschool, Iastalikath. And I was taught by a woman who was very generous with her knowledge of the language, not just within her family and in the little daycare that I attended, but broadly with the Cowichan community. And so I didn't know that I was different because all of the other little kids in my daycare were the same as me. There's maybe one little white kid. I think his mom or dad worked at the band office where the daycare was. And so for other people to speak Hulkaminam, not just Cowichan people, was normal because he was learning it too. And so I suppose that I was shielded from racism at that point in my life, but as I got older, I started to recognize that being Indigenous sometimes meant that people expected less of me. And that didn't sit well with me because my dad had really high standards. He had a lot of high expectations of me, and I'm 5'1.5". I add the half because I have daughters, but he always told me I was 6 feet tall. And we joke about it because he told me, you're 6 feet tall, you're 6 feet tall, you're 6 feet tall, because he wanted me to believe that I could be bigger, that I could be more than the little girl who would be hurt because of some things that I heard or that I observed in the world. And so recognizing that there were different sets of expectations for me and my non-Indigenous peers in classrooms and schools made me feel like I had to prove something, that I had to prove my worth. And so I studied really hard. I put a lot of time and effort into my academic studies. And I really believed that that was the path to success. I really believed that that was a place of safety. I didn't know, like looking back, I didn't know that I found refuge at school because at home, my mom died of suicide when I was 6 years old. And so that loss really had a significant impact on my life, and it changed the course of my life. And so being at school meant, I got nurturing from the teachers. I got positive feedback. I got validation. I could be a normal kid or I could be an exceptional one because I was a good learner. And so, I went through life really focused on, meeting goals. And when I was in my late 20s, I decided to do a master's degree. And someone suggested to me that I study cultural education. And so I wrote a master's thesis about language revitalization and how lyrical music can help as a tool for language revitalization. And doing that, I had to do a lot of thinking about my past. My grandparents, as I mentioned, were fluent Hulkaminam speakers, but I wasn't. And so learning the language was really important to me when I became a parent, and studying it for my master's gave me time to reflect on moments when it was pointed out to me that I wasn't a Hulkaminam speaker. And so I didn't realize as a child the devastating impact that residential schools had on my people. And I knew that my dad went to residential school, and really the only thing that he told me about it was that it was a place where he learned to hate. painful to think about the harm, the damage that was caused by this colonial policy of assimilation. And so knowing that my grandpa still spoke the language, despite the way he was likely treated at residential school, tells me that he had a lot of resiliency. And I know from stories from my dad that when my grandpa came home from residential schools, because he was there for 12 years, his family, his aunts and uncles would sit him in, I imagine, in a circle and talk to him until he could speak the language again. And he was fluent in both Hulkminam and Sinchothan, a language that's spoken here on the southern part of the island. And so he didn't teach us, but he carried, those two dialects of language. And when I look back and I remember, I had this friend when I was about 13 years old, and we went to a private school together, and we were both, overachievers, really competitive with one another. And she, she met my grandpa, and it was astounding to me that she knew him. But he used to teach Hulkminam in the Nanaimo school district. And so when she talked to me about him, she said, your grandpa teaches in schools in Nanaimo and my mom's a principal there. And I said, that's great. And she had a little book with Hulkminam writing in there and coloring, and she was showing it to me, and she says, how do you say this? How do you say that? And so I would, explain it to her. And at one point she was a little bit critical. She said, this is your grandpa, and I'm spending time with him, and he's teaching me Hulkminam. Why don't you go see him? Why don't you know your language? And that hurt. I didn't really understand why it hurt. But when I look back on it as an adult, I know it hurt because it felt like an attack on my identity because I don't speak Hulkminam fluently. I have the understanding of maybe an 18-month-old child because I understand phrases, I recognize them, I know, I can substitute words sometimes, I can say a few sentences to introduce myself. But when I reflect on it, I can see that my grandpa not teaching me or my dad our language was really a way to protect us and shield us from the abuse that he and so many other children experienced at residential schools because they didn't speak English. And so that loss, thinking about it tightens my throat. It makes my eyes start to leak, and it makes my cheeks warm for a couple of reasons, because I'm angry. I'm angry about what happened. I'm angry at how painful so many childhoods were, and how parenthood was disrupted for so many mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. And at the same time, I feel so lucky. I feel so lucky that I didn't go to residential school and my children don't go. I feel lucky to give them a childhood that's privileged compared to mine. And I know that what I do needs to be done, like as I'm raising them, needs to be done in almost like a protective shield. And I know that generally today in parenthood we talk about bubble parents or helicopter parents, and maybe I'm one of those because I want to wrap my kids up and bubble wrap and protect them. But I know that as they go out into the world, I need to equip them with a language that they will need to use to respond to racism or to respond to attacks on their identity. And those attacks don't just come from white people, they come from other brown people too. They come from the other kids who don't understand the history of colonization and the impacts that it had on our people. And so for my daughters to navigate this world with me, I know that they're lucky too. And I feel like talking about this really taps into like a warrior energy that I imagine my grandfather had speaking the language, because he was a humorous, very humorous person and very entertaining. And I think about the ways that he passed on culture to us that are are so much bigger than language. I know that language forms a big part of how we express ourselves and how we think about ourselves, but I know that my grandpa, one of the most important things that he could have done for our family was to preserve our songs. And so I come from a family of singers, and I can tell you I'd much rather be singing right now than talking. And they are beautiful, beautiful singers. I know that I'm really proud of them and that others are too. And there are lots of great singers in different Indigenous communities up and down the coast, but I swear to you, my family is one of the best groups of singers. And my grandpa, as a leader in our community, he helped to preserve Zinqua, the original Indian opera, which can be Googled. And you can see performances of him, and you can see the impact that it has on the crowd when he's singing. You can feel it when you listen to his voice. You can feel the warmth just wrapping around you, and it feels good. And I hold on to that. I hold on to it and I carry it. And when I come to work, I bring that with me because I know that some of the things I'm going to read are going to be hard. I know that I could get a call in the middle of the day because my sisters were kicked out of a coffee shop because they were being kids and knocked over a cup of coffee and someone yelled at them. And I know my response is going to be initially, was it because they were kids or is it because they're Native? And I know that's not a thought that every parent has to deal with, but it's one of the first thoughts that crosses my mind is, am I being treated differently because I'm Indigenous? And I don't want my kids to have that be like the initial thought that they have when they go out into the world, but I know that for many of us, it's our reality. That when we walk down the street, people aren't going to move out of our way. Sometimes they're just going to walk right by us. It doesn't matter if their shoulders hit us or their hips do as they're walking. And so, you know, I do what I can to protect them and to be strong for them and to really preserve the legacy that my grandfather left for us, that we are more than just the story of residential schools. We are more than the story of colonization. We are survivors. That's all I had to share today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. That's very, very heartwarming. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. So I'd like to say thank you to all my amazing panelists as well. It's a great opportunity to be here. As introduced from the start, my name is Toulou Sazua. I am a Scrum Master at the BC Dev Exchange. I work with an amazing team. I'm hoping they're tuned in today. Shout out to my team members if they're listening today. I am originally from Nigeria, so that's a country in West Africa. It's actually the most populous country in Africa. So I was raised in a middle-class African home with values, strong Christian values. And my parents raised us to be confident, to be strong, and to be resilient, and also to know that the sky is the limit, nothing, that you're unstoppable. So those are the things the values that I was raised with. And I would say that my first experience with racism was when I moved to England to pursue a master's degree. I remember working in a call center during my master, just make some side money, and I would take some calls and have some of the customers screaming at me or uttering racial slurs, or like they didn't understand my accent, or go back to your country, so many experiences like that. And for a young girl that has left home and everything very familiar to her, I grew up in a country where everyone looked like me. My measure of success were people that looked like me. The people I looked up to were people that looked like me as well. And then moving out of my home country to another country to study, and then being made to feel that I was any less or different, or my opinions didn't matter. So that was a lot for me to have to deal with in my early 20s. I was far away from home. And that takes an emotional and psychological toll on you as an individual. But as I've grown over the years, so I would say my experiences have been a lot more covert than overt, so more subliminal. So the racial microaggression, the systemic racism. I remember when we migrated to Canada and, trying to look for a job in my field. And one of the first things that we were told is that, with your Nigerian sounding name, you'd have to abbreviate that because on resumes, you'd have a very small a small chance of being called back because your name is not pronounceable or people, identify that it's an ethnic name. So that was one of the first things that I had to, deal with. And I thought to myself, why? Why would anyone not look at the resume and, judge me based on my skills or my abilities that I've documented there very clearly? And so that was a definite, I would say, light bulb moment for me. And I thought, okay, strange. But then we did it, right, for the first time, just to get our foot through the door. But I think a few years afterwards, I was like, you know what? Any company or organization that doesn't provide me with an opportunity to even, come to an interview and meet with me and judge me based on the content of my character, rather than what my name looks like on a resume, then, I don't want to be there. And that was a defining moment for me. But I know that a lot of people, Black people like me, experience that as well. And as we're all aware, racism is that white elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. I'm sure that every panel member here can identify that this is a very vulnerable moment for us. Like, we are laying ourselves bare to everyone. And, speaking about things that maybe we've spoken about hush-hush in our own circles, or we've spoken about in our homes. And, now with the anti-Black racism campaigns going on around the world, there's a lot more racial awakening and cultural awakening. And, there's that responsibility on everyone now. There's a quote by Martin Luther King that says, injustice everywhere is a threat to injustice. Sorry, is a threat to justice everywhere. So injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we can't act like we're not impacted by this or we're not disturbed by this. I believe strongly that not acknowledging racism exists or not talking about racism is perpetuating it. Even unconscious bias as well. We understand that there's unconscious bias in recruitment, in hiring, when you're applying for a job. But also even with there's racial profiling as well that, I have a husband, sorry, not husbands, I have one husband. I have brothers that live in the States. I have cousins that live in the States. And within the Black community, we're having these discussions about what we need to start to talk to our kids about racism, and how, if you're driving a car and you get pulled over by the cops, how you have to make sure that your hands are up so that you don't look like you're threatening to them, right? Even my husband going out in a hoodie with his hood over his head, that makes me very nervous because, we've had instances in the States where Black people have been shot or killed, because they weren't, identified. The big ones that we've seen on social media or in the news recently was the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And these are people like me, so I can't act like I don't feel impacted by that, because this could be a sister, a friend, a relative, someone that I know. And, I think my charge or my request to every other person that isn't, so or rather it's my non-Black friends, I would say, or my non-Black colleagues that haven't experienced this, is to lean in, understand what our experiences are. I can bet you if you put a couple of Black or Indigenous people of color in a room and hear their experiences, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack, and these things stay with us. There are instances of even medical racism where, for every 13 white women that die at childbirth, the number compared to the number of Black women is astronomical as well. There's research that backs that up as well. So being a woman of color, or being a Black woman specifically, shouldn't be something that I'm afraid of, or I'm constantly checking myself. Do I measure up? Am I worth it? Those are the thoughts that unconsciously are in our heads. A lot of what Stephanie mentioned at the start are things that I can relate with, and things I may not even have thought about, but recently with all what's been going on in the news and in the media, and now there's that awakening for everyone. And my recommendation is us, as individuals, let's start to check our unconscious biases. How are we allowing our biases determine how we are relating with other people, or how we're making decisions as well? Let's start to check that as individuals and as organizations. We talk about psychological safety in Agile. With your Agile team, you want your team to feel safe and secure to be able to speak out about the things that bother them. So even in organizations, do people of color feel that they have those opportunities, or those safe, or that safe place, or those policies that allow them to actually speak up when they are facing any racial discrimination or racial disparities? That's very important. I know that I've spoken to a couple of colleagues and friends and about their individual experiences, and collectively as Black people, I know that we're grieving, because this point in history is it's monumental. The impact is far-reaching. We're raising kids right now that we want to see others and see them as equals and not any less. Very recently, a friend was sharing her experience with me where her 5-year-old daughter came back home crying one day. This is very, very recently, I think about 2 weeks ago, and had complained that a couple of third graders, she's in grade 1, had said they didn't want to play with her because she was Black. And I mean, a 5-year-old, think about it. I mean, we have kids, we can relate. A 5-year-old having to suddenly realize that, maybe different, it's different how I'm treated. There's a different treatment that I get that, maybe my white counterparts are also, getting. So we're having the race discussion with our kids now, even as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old, because it's important that we equip them with the tools to be able to stand up for themselves, or support themselves, or explain to other people that don't know or are ignorant. But then ignorance isn't an excuse anymore. And for me personally, I feel that racism is learned. And there's a lot that could be done on the home front to start to change perspectives and mindsets. I'm not sure if there's anything else I want to add to that, but that's my experience so far.
Wow. Well, these two ladies are phenomenal. Thank you for sharing your story, Stephanie, and yours, Toulou. I was thinking about how to start my own story, and I think I would like to start the first memory of racism that I probably have suppressed a long time ago. And I agree with Stephanie, when you talk about these things, it open up wounds, like old wounds that you probably never talk about. And some of the things I'll reveal today, my parents don't even know about. My family didn't know I was experiencing this. So when I came to Canada from the Philippines, I was in grade 8 here. So I was 13 years old. And I went to a predominantly Asian school when I was in grade 8. And at first I thought everyone kind of looked the same here. Like, they're from the Philippines, like China, you name it, like anywhere in Asia, right? It's like, oh, cool. And then that was the first time I experienced racism, actually, was from those people, because they were making fun of my accent and they were calling me fresh off the boat, which is weird because all I think about, I came from an airplane, so I don't know why you're still calling me fresh off the boat, right? So I was very logical then. So for me, it was like, this doesn't sum up. And that was the first experience that I had that I could remember. And so it was really weird for me because I thought, oh, we have the same skin color, like we probably have the same ethnical background as well. But I was getting bullied from these people that are Asians as well. So that was really interesting. And the difference is that they were born here in Canada and I wasn't. And so they have categorized me as the other, as being different, that not enough, and not belonging. So then that went by. It stopped a little bit when my pronunciation got better. I was taking English classes in ESL, so that kind of went away a little bit. And then I transferred to a school where there's more mixed race kids. So there were white kids and Puerto Rican kids and all that stuff. And then I got bullied by white girls, actually. And they said that I had a weird name. And I said, that sounds so weird, it doesn't even belong here. So that's when I was 16, I think. And then, I try not to think about those things a lot. Like, I try not to complain or be overly sensitive, because sometimes that's the comment that I hear when I even try to talk about these things. Like, why are you being overly sensitive? It's fine. It's not like they hit you, but words really hurt. And saying things like you don't belong or you sound weird or different, that doesn't make it any less painful, right? And so I try to say that it's okay. It's their own point of view. What they think of me doesn't need to affect how I think of myself. I was raised by parents that really think I could do anything. Quite similar to actually Stephanie's and Toulou's, the way they describe the way they were raised. That is, sky is the limit, you're 6 feet tall, although I'm 5'2". And then I'm like, you can do anything, right? And I remember every time I get an A+ in my class, my mom would just say, of course you are. Of course, that's what you're meant to do. And she didn't expect any less of me. Which really turned me into this competitive person who is, all about academics, and that was success was for me too, was being an A+ student, really getting good grades and all that stuff, right? Like following the path. Like in Asian cultures, either you're a doctor, engineer, you're a lawyer. That's it, okay? Or a nurse if you're Filipino, haha. But I didn't follow that path, and I changed path, and now working in the government in a digital talent lead, I'm in tech, woman of color, and I'm young. And sometimes you go into meetings, you say, your opinions, and sometimes your opinions doesn't really, taken into consideration. And I think about a couple of things. Is it because I'm brown, or I'm young, or I'm female? Like, those are the things that you think about, And so I try not to dwell on them, and I try just to, keep my head high and just say, that's their point of view. It doesn't need to affect me. And then about, I think 2 months ago, I was walking by, just, my regular day, just going for a walk, because working from home has been, just sitting around. Someone just stopped me on the street and just say, hey. And I was like, yes. And just say, what are you? Where are you from? Are you Tibetan or Chinese? Just ask me out of nowhere where I was from. There is no context. I was just walking. And I felt othered once again in my adulthood. And it's just that I've been considering Canada my home for such a long time. When you ask me where I'm from, I'm going to tell you that I grew up in Winnipeg. But then they will ask you, no, where are you really from? Like they say from twice, It's like, it's like, you mean my mother? My mother's womb? Yeah, that's where I'm from. And then they would have to say, no, like, your ancestry, like, are you Oriental or something? These things come up, and I feel like if you just met me, don't ask me that. That shouldn't be the first words coming out of your mouth. Like, get to know me first before asking me where are you from. Like, I wonder if other people, if you are not brown or in BIPOC, like, would you get that question? Like, would you say, where are you from? Like, are you from Germany? No, it's mostly people of color that they get that question. Like, where are you really from? Which means to me that I'm being othered. Again, that I'm not from here. And it's like, no, you're not from here. You have a weird name and a weirder last name, or you have two. And then, yeah, so it's kind of interesting that the way I've been dealing with this is just making sure that I don't dwell too much, but also being willing to talk about them as well, because I try not to talk about them a lot. I don't want to seem like overly sensitive or victimizing myself, but it's not true, right? Like, you have to talk about these things so other people know. And for me, it's just teaching myself how to be more understanding. And sometimes people don't want to come across like that, but they just don't know how to talk to you, or they don't know how to ask the question. So I'm always giving people the benefit of the doubt. And so most of the time I'll just smile and say, well, if you really want to know where I'm really from, and then I would be more open to converse about my own, ethnical background. And even I'm not purely Filipino, I'm a mix of things. So even for me to say, where are you from? There's so many, unpacked stories of where I'm from. And I really hope that the talk about racism and how we can combat racism is not something that would just stop a week from now after this conversation, after social media. I wish that it will continue on, whether it's that within your team, the branch, just keep talking about them. Like, you could ask us questions, it's okay. And yeah, that's all I have for now. Thank you. Roland.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you to these three incredibly strong and courageous women. Thank you for sharing your stories. It's not easy. It's not easy talking about going through all of these things, but we're here together to share the stories. And my name is Roland Best. I work for the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction as a Strategic Human Resources Manager. Now, throughout my life, I've had racial slurs written in my school yearbook. Racial slurs said to me on the school ground as a young black boy. Racial slurs yelled at me by strangers in public as a black male adult. Constantly security guards following me in stores, in museums, in art galleries. So many so-called random checks at various airports. Receiving the look when walking in certain neighborhoods, and also having discussions with other Black, Indigenous, and people of color on the brutal and awful way that we get treated by some police officers. Recently, while traveling, I was pointed at and laughed at on numerous occasions. Now, all of these examples are based from systemic racism. But one additional thing that happens and that they're based on is just one thing, and that's skin color. The color of my skin, the skin color of all Black, Indigenous, and people of color. As Black, Indigenous, and people of color, from the time they were able to talk and better understand language, we are taught by our parents, our older brothers and sisters, our uncles and aunts, our grandparents, our elders. We are taught about our skin color and the racism that we will deal with because of it. But we are also taught how to make our beautiful skin color extremely tough so that we can then develop the necessary resilience and powerful strength that we need in order to face racism on a regular basis like we do. We can't let it break us. I do my best when dealing with racist situations. I try hard to manage them as best as I can. But I'm not gonna lie, it's mentally draining and it eats away at my soul. And in some cases, it cuts deep and it hurts like hell. This was definitely the case last year, Easter long weekend 2019, here in Victoria, BC, Canada. It was early Sunday morning and only my son and I were up. I left something in the trunk of my car from the night before after having Easter dinner at my sister's house. Now, this long holiday weekend was weighing heavily on all of our family because it was soon after the sudden and shocking passing of my mother. My mom passed away a few months before that holiday weekend. My son and I crossed the street in front of my home towards my car. And as we got to the driver's side of the car, I then glanced over at the hood of the car. And I noticed that something was written on the hood of my car. It was written on the light film of dust that gathered on my car. So because of that, I assumed that it was something like somebody trying to be funny and something like clean me or something along those lines. As my son and I made our way to the front of the car, I then paused and looked at what was written. And in big letters, there it was, nigger, on the hood of my car in front of my home. And later I saw it was on the back window of my car as well. Now this racist experience was something that I've never felt before, because after I read the racial slur on my car, I then looked down at my precious son, who was 16 months at the time. And as soon as I looked down on him, the sadness was so intense and it hit me so hard. I'll never forget that feeling. As parents, we do the best that we can to protect our children and to be strong for them. But it was at that time that I knew, man, oh man, my little guy was going to have to face so much racist garbage in his future because of the beautiful color of his skin. My heart was broken. It was so painful to think of the hurt that he was going to have to receive when racist acts were dealt and directed towards him. It was hard to think straight at that moment. After kissing my boy and squeezing him so tight, it was tough to think about what to do next. And to be honest, I could have just cleaned off the hood of my car, cleaned off the back window of my car, and moved on in my day and just added that racist act to the pile of many that we have to deal with on a regular basis. But instead of that, I was not going to just move on and be quiet. I was going to take this opportunity to share my story with the world so that people that don't have to experience racism can get a better understanding of what's going on. Now, I don't know if it was one person or a group of people that did that racist act to my car. I don't know. But what I do know is that they did that act to try and hurt me and try to cause some pain. I'm not going to lie, it hurt like crazy and it was very painful because I experienced it with my son by my side. Now, what these individuals did not anticipate is the fact that their ignorant racist act has made me stronger than ever, because I've taken this story. I've taken the hate crime that was done against me, and now I own it, I control it, I use it. It is now my tool and my story that I use to amplify my voice immensely when talking about racism issues. Now, for all of you that are listening, it's very important that you realize and understand that every Black, Indigenous, and people of color have so many stories about the racism that they have faced when they were kids, as they're adults, from day one to today. This is the awful reality of all of us that happen to have a skin color that isn't white. Now, there's way too many people that know way too much about these racism issues now. So as a result, there is no more being quiet about this. There is no more learning just a bit about this. There is no more caring about this for a few weeks and then moving on to a different thing that grabs your attention. As Black, Indigenous, and people of color, We do not have that luxury, that privilege to just turn it off and not worry about these racism issues on a regular basis. So because of that, we need everyone to get involved. We need everyone to help keep the spotlight on these issues. We need everyone to help get actively involved with these issues. We need everyone to do what they can in order for us to make systemic racism improve, get better, we need everyone involved. We need everyone involved so that eventually we can have some real changes happening in systemic racism, in our school systems, in our policing policies, in our government practices, in our legal systems. We need everyone involved. To all of you that are actively involved in this fight against racism, to all of you that are seeking the knowledge and awareness about these issues, to all of you that are using your voices loudly in this fight, to all of you that donate money, to all of you that help strengthen and build the resources that are already out there to help in the fight against racism, that are doing some great work, to all of you, I say thank you. Thank you for truly caring about racial justice. Thank you for giving a damn. And thank you for at least doing something about it. Thank you. With that, I still ask, even for you, and trust me, myself included, for all of you to get more involved. We all need to do so much more in this fight against racism. We need to do more so that we can work together and work effectively to make the change that we need for a better future for everyone. That includes my black son, his little black sister, and all of us black, indigenous, and people of color. For everyone. Because enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Stephanie, Toulou, and Roland for really talking about these difficult things. We have shared a lot, and I don't know about you, but I feel drained, like emotionally drained. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So there are some questions here in Slido. Thanks for sending that in. And there's number one here at the top, 68 votes, and it's from Anonymous. It says, how do you start a conversation about systemic racism in a non-blaming, non-threatening way and without putting BIPOC on the spot? Small team. So anyone could answer this question. Stephanie, Toulou, or Roland. What do you guys think? How do you start the conversation?
I think that we have to start, I say we, but I'm part of BIPOC. So I think my colleagues need to start by acknowledging their privilege, their unearned advantages, because we can't tackle systemic racism if we're not willing to talk about that. And honestly, one day I would like to see, I would like to see this talked about from the perspective of my non-BIPOC colleagues. Tell me what you learned. Tell me how you changed. Tell me what small step you took after hearing us share our pain so openly with you. What inspired you? That's honestly the conversation that I want to start having, because we've been talking about our pain for a long time now.
I agree. As far as this is not, it's nothing really new. It's been around for a long time as far as the racism that we're dealing with. And these conversations, and even when it comes to resources and getting knowledge about how to do certain things, putting in the efforts to search online and to ask different people. So it's very important, because there's resources out there that will help explain how to get things started and conversations starting. I know with our ministry, for example, we are creating conversation guides around that. And so it really is kind of seeking this information out there. Fully realize that having a person, a black, indigenous, people of color, that you can ask these questions is great as well. But as you know, it is mentally draining, and it is important that other people are putting in effort as well to try and get the knowledge that they need to help with these conversations and help to figure out kind of how they can move forward and how they can be a stronger ally in various things. So it's crucial that you put the effort in there as well to really want to make a difference, to really get involved. And because honestly, you search it online and there's a million resources that come up. So please put the work in. Thank you.
Toulou?
No, I think they both hit the nail on the head. So it's yeah.
Is that the only question? We have 6 minutes, so we can. Okay, so the next one is, how do we, the public service, ensure that policy and legislation do not promote or perpetuate racialized oppression? I would speak to it a little bit, actually. So my work is as a hiring manager in the digital talent space. In terms of policy and more likely actually processes and how we do things, one thing that I was really curious about, was there any way to redact people's names on resumes and on application forms? Because we can use technology. Technology is a powerful way in how we can combat racism as well, depending on how you design it, of course. However, one thing I was thinking about as a hiring manager is that, why do I need to see people's name and last names? And because then sometimes you could identify you can identify gender, race through their name, their first name and their last name. And even sometimes, say for instance, they came from university of something, like a different country. I don't need to know that. And so I hope that changes moving forward in terms of recruitment and hiring would be capabilities of redacting those information that could identify someone because of their race or their gender. I think that we should incorporate some of those so that we could really say that, okay, I didn't judge someone because, you know, they're BIPOC, and I also wouldn't want to feel like I got hired for the job because of my skin color. They're trying to meet a quota. Mm-hmm. I would never, ever want to feel that way. That someone would say, let's hire this person with a weird last name because she sounds like she's colored or belonging to BIPOC. And so, again, it's because if we do that, you don't feel othered, like, right? It feels like you belong, because like, it doesn't matter what your name is. We don't care. And so for me, changing some of those procedures and processes in hiring, I think would be really helpful. Yeah. You guys want to add anything to that?
I agree. It's definitely, and I know some ministries are doing that as far as removing names. It's not a common practice, but it is something that's being done by a ministry or two that I'm familiar with, and it is something that, as far as not knowing, you know, the ethnicity based on somebody's name is a valuable step in the right direction, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I've, you know, in some of the research that I've stumbled on, even anti-bias training as well.
Oh yeah.
As one of the recommendations as well for either recruiters or the hiring team that are going through resumes, to be able to make decisions based on the content rather than, you know, the name or any bias or unconscious bias that we may have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, I think we have about 3 minutes, and we'll go through the last question here. How do you bring about change when decision makers are often in the very group that denies the existence of a race problem? That's a really tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, with that, that's kind of the essence of all of this is, and it's a simple thing, but the reality is that we need a lot of work to figure that out. But all it comes down to is we need more diverse individuals and more people that feel included at the table of making decisions. So we need people that are at the table and have the power to make decisions, being there, as opposed to just being beneath and being on a lower level and not being involved with actual decision and the power with that. So we need more people at the table, and that's what we're trying to figure out, how we can get more people that represent and identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. We need more of those individuals at the important tables to be able to use their voices to make the proper decisions, and that's going to help create this change that we need. So,
If I could just build on that, working in the Public Service Agency, I'm familiar with the Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan from 2017, which included 2 commitments that I think are relevant to Roland's statements about having diverse leaders at the table, diverse decision makers. And so one of the commitments that's being worked on right now is about accelerating diverse talent in the public service. One that I'm working on is the new Indigenous Leadership and Mentorship Program, and this will help our Indigenous colleagues in the public service to develop their careers, and eventually I would like to see more Indigenous people and other people of color and Black represented in those decision-making roles. And so those are at least 2 of the commitments that are in progress. How long it will take before we see results is another story, but I feel like the wheels of change are in motion.
Wow, that's really
great. That's perfect.
That's, yeah.
566 people have been on this.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'll take this 1 minute to thank everybody for coming here today. There's no words to say how thankful I am, how grateful I am for Stephanie, Toulou, and Roland for sharing their stories. These are very courageous people sitting here today, holding space. And I'm also very thankful for all the audience, for listening to this, for attending to this, asking hard and great questions. And last point though, some of those questions we will try to answer after, and we will have a blog after this so we could sort of discuss how we would like to answer those questions moving forward. And as you know, there is a survey after this, so please fill them out. We want to learn more about how you want to continue this conversation. Perhaps you want a part 2. And we would love to deliver it, and we would love to hear your thoughts and how we can improve and what kind of topics you would like us to talk about. Once again, my name is Dea and I work at the BC Dev Exchange, and thank you so much for being here with us, and I hope you have a great day and we will talk soon. Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.